It's time for Screen Junkies Movie Fights.
What's up, party people? Oh, hello. Hi. What's up, party people over there? Welcome to Movie Fights. In case you haven't noticed by now, I am not Hal Rudnick. I am Spencer J. Gilbert. Hal is on his honeymoon. Give him a celebratory hoot hoot on his social media. You're stuck with me and these fellas, because today it's the fourth phase 4 of the month-long Almost Got Him Dan Murrell Invitational. Oh, so close. I promise I won't hold it against you as a man who almost got him. But everyone here will be trying to score a win over the Movie Fights champ, culminating in next week's 4th of July Last Fighter Standing. Oh.
For the belt.
For the belt. Belt will be on the line next week. Nice. Is it this week? No?
What?
You didn't bring it with you, the belt? No? If someone
no,
wins? No,
I feel like it's sitting into the room
still?
until
Okay.
the belt's on the line.
Okay, fair enough.
Nice.
But we do have your toughest challenge yet, I like to think. First up, he is one half of the Real Rejects. Keeper of the bathroom keys? Is that an inside joke I missed? It's Greg ALBA.
You were gone.
All right.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I've never been in a video with you, Spencer.
Nice.
I'm very excited.
Wow.
I've watched every fight Dan has had in the last few weeks, and I've learned nothing on how to beat him. I am very excited to be here.
There goes the world's worst fan theory that we're the same person.
No, they think me and Cucumber are the same.
Oh, got it. Second up, he's a co-host of the Nerd Goat podcast. You can see him Monday and Wednesdays on SJU. It's Ed Greer.
Hey guys, it's really awesome to be here. Greg was saying earlier before air that this was like a dream. It really is. It really is like one of those you wake up, you're naked in high school, you got a test. All this, that's what it feels like to me right now.
I think we had two different interpretations of what I meant by that word.
But no, well, you meant like a dream, like
I'm not
awesome
like, this
dream?
doesn't feel real. I don't feel like I'm present right now.
No, I'm definitely in a nightmare because it's just me as just a frail guy versus two Ultrons, and I'm just trying to stay in it, baby.
Well, it's called the Joe Star tactic.
Yeah. Props to you for setting reasonably achievable dreams, you guys. And then the man of the hour, he's the reigning Movie Fights champ. It's Dan Murrell.
Yes, and I was excited for this. I when we were planning all the different ones, I was like, I want to definitely fight two guys who I was in a championship fight with, because I love that caliber competition. So I'm very much looking forward to this one.
Awesome. But that's not all. There's more people in this small room over there. We did it. We fit him in. It's London calling, Lon Harris, and the voice of the people, Daniel Radford.
Hello.
Hey, everybody. I'm so
Yeah.
happy the key is back. It really means a lot to me.
What happened, Spencer, was while
Yes.
you were gone, the bathroom here was under construction, and we had to go upstairs, and we had a finite number of keys, and Greg walked off with one of our precious few bathroom keys.
Intentionally. I lost.
Intentionally.
Yeah.
As a psycho.
I still got invited back. A testament to his strength, the caliber of his performance.
Brutal. That's what the champs need to do to get an edge. For those of you who haven't seen Movie Fights before, hello. It's a best of 7 points game. There are three main rounds, I believe, longer rounds, and then a bunch of speed rounds to see who can get to 4 first. In the event of some ties, we'll do some tiebreakers. And come on, you guys know how this works by now. Let's just fight, okay? Drop that package.
Prepare to die.
Ladies and gentlemen.
It's main event time.
That Roadhouse guy gets me every time. I just think about what he said like a minute ago or a minute later. It's like, jeez.
Oh, we're back. Oh, hello. Hi. Question number 1, you guys. Spider-Man FFH opens next week. Who gives the best performance in any Spider-Man movie? Greg, we'll start with you.
Yeah, my pick for this one, for all these picks today, I'm experimenting by just going with my personal favorites. I don't know if that'll ultimately be the best, but I actually have a lot of faith that this one is the best one of them all. I went with Tobey Maguire from Spider-Man 2. In that film, Peter Parker, he is struggling with balancing his personal life and balancing his superhero life. And what I love about this performance here is, yes, it's funny, it's endearing, it's earnest. At the same time, though, it's very relatable. I find it to be the most authentic performance out of any performance in any of the Spider-Man films in general. Because we can all relate with the idea of having to balance, like having a work life and then having a social life. And within this film, what I love about Tobey Maguire's portrayal is that he is always, he's multi-layered in every single scene. There's always an inner conflict, and he gets a chance to shine and show a variety of different emotions and a whole range of his character by the specific relationships he has with people. Like with Aunt May, there's always this resonation of guilt underneath it for what happened with Uncle Ben, and she doesn't know the truth. With Harry Osborn and even J. Jonah Jameson, this situation he can't control, so he has this built-up angst. And then with Mary Jane Watson, you see this side of him that's like boyish, romantic, and sweet. I think his performance here gives the most range. He leads this film, he anchors it, and on top of that too, he's a very generous actor to the point where he consistently brings out the best in other performers in every scene that he's in. So I love him in it, and he's also a total badass too in the film. So yeah, I definitely would have to go with Tobey Maguire and Spider-Man 2.
All right, strong opening salvo. Ed, who do you got?
Well, I picked. It's a pretty conventional pick. It's Spider-Man, played by Tom Holland. And I really do believe that there's a qualitative difference between this Spider-Man and any other. And it isn't beholden to any other films, much like some of the performances from my distinguished competition. This one it's him establishing that he's going to be Spider-Man for 10 to 15 years. And he's laying that groundwork so solidly that you can see that at the end of that movie. He's doing so many different acting challenges, from doing an accent, I'm not trying to downplay that, but doing a really awesome English accent, a regular American English accent that slips maybe one time the whole movie when he gets really excited. There's also the level of him being like, obviously, he doesn't have all the scenes to cry over Uncle Ben, but you feel the gravitas of those moments when they talk around those in this film. And I think this is the first Spider-Man movie in this whole conversation we're about to have that actually does establish a whole new continuity, and that is on the back of Tom Holland. And he really does play the perfect balance between like tortured soul and the Pagliacci that lasts to keep from crying.
Awesome, Ed. Going with Tommy Holland. Dan?
I went on a limb and picked a non-Spider-Man for my pick. I went with who's actually my favorite, not just my favorite villain, but I think still maybe my favorite character from any of the Spider-Man movies, which is Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus, Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2. I think that he really ushered in an era of a prestige actor who wasn't afraid to bring pathos and gravitas to this kind of role. And why I think that it puts it above any other performance in a Spider-Man movie is the depth of what he's asked to do. This is maybe, by appearance, perhaps the most ridiculous Spider-Man villain. He's got big mechanical arms coming out of his back. In this movie, he's like a middle-aged guy in a kind of a girdle. He could have looked really ridiculous, really stupid. And Sam Raimi's style, the way that he plays the movies, the villains have to go sometimes, and you see that in the birth of Doc Ock sequence, almost to these operatic heights of just, no! And I mean, if it's done wrong, it can be really bad. Alfred Molina is able to do that, I'm a guy with mechanical arms climbing up the side of a bank, and balance that with the smaller, more measured character that he is at the beginning of the movie, where he's Peter's mentor and his friend, and then is able to play the entire movie basically opposite himself. And do it and make it a villain that you can relate to, a villain that you still fear. The amount of different things that Alfred Molina was asked to do in that movie, to juggle the tones, the fact that he did it so well and was still able to play the role both as big as it needed to be and as small as it needed to be, makes it my favorite performance in any of the Spider-Man movies, and why I picked him today.
All right. Well, that's going to be tough to tear each other down, but let's hear it.
Well, I mean, I would certainly say that these movies do kind of poach great actors for different roles. I mean, Jonathan Rhys-Davies, who's not an Oscar winner, I don't believe, but he was the Kingpin in the 80s in a freaking TV movie, and then you got Willem Dafoe in the very first movie. Willem Dafoe is an Oscar-worthy actor at the very least. So I think that point is a little off. I also think that the operatic nature that you're speaking of is to its detriment, whereas I just got to say Tom Holland's performance is very naturalistic, even amongst these three.
I feel like Tom Holland he's charismatic, he's very likable, likable, but I feel like this idea of so much tortured soul and gravitas, I don't actually feel like that's present in the film. To me, it's a very light-hearted film, and his performance is very lighthearted. He's probably the funniest Spider-Man, and probably the funniest character to have appeared in any of the Spider-Man franchises.
Yeah, he's definitely the most Spider-Man too. Thank you for making that point.
I don't think he is the most Spider-Man.
He definitely is.
The fact that he doesn't have this level of, like, I know we are kind of sick with the quote, with great power comes great responsibility. At the same time, that's so integral to who Spider-Man is. It's like, what's his relatability exactly? I feel like Tobey Maguire's is much more relatable. I mean, like Tom Holland.
He spends half the movie not having powers, so where's all the angst between him having to go to
a portion of the movie, but the movie's like 2.5 hours or something like that. But
yeah,
that's part of
every minute of it.
That's part of the beauty of his performance in it, is that you're watching a guy who's having to learn about what sacrifices should he take when he's going down this path of, you know, trying to be a superhero, and he's drawn to his personal life. He decides to sacrifice his the superhero stuff, but then when he's in his personal life, you see this very subtle, contained performance where, like, he'll see people being harmed, in danger, or someone that even gets killed, and just by his expressions alone, you can feel this overbearing guilt. Because I love how contained it is, because he has literally no one to open up to.
I only have one retort to that, and it's just that he does have a whole other movie's worth of adventures, a whole other movie as the main character worth of adventures to draw upon, to build a separate layer to this performance that you're describing, and this sort of.
But it's still a very different journey that he's in within Spider-Man 2 as compared to Spider-Man 1.
I mean, my guy's establishing a new interpretation for the next, like I said, 15 years, and he's also doing all the work of like what that particular version of Spider-Man is making him do. He must show all this hero worship towards Tony Stark, which wasn't there, frankly, in the comics until about 10 years ago.
That's my issue with it.
He's got to do a lot of. I'm just saying he's got to do a lot. He's doing all of this world building and all this necessary storytelling in a very naturalistic and confident way.
Well, the writing
I think you're both still, but you're just debating over who's playing Spider-Man better, and that for me is why I actually sort of disqualified anyone playing Spider-Man when I'm looking at this. Is that I think it is a little bit. It's like Spider-Man is always Spider-Man. This idea of like I'm wrestling, and you're with Tobey Maguire, I'm wrestling with the responsibility of my personal life and my superhero life. That's in the first movie. That's in the third Spider-Man movie. That's in both Andrew Garfield movies. That's in your movie. That is just a quality about Spider-Man. I don't think it's the performance that makes that relatable. I think it's because that is an essential part of that character. Spider-Man is written to be relatable to a comic book audience because he's the lead character of that comic book. He's aimed toward the kids. I don't think that's necessarily because Tobey Maguire's performance was great. I think that's just the quality of the character. Same with Tom Holland. I think he's likable and I think he's fun because that's the way the character is written. Whereas with Doc Ock, I think if you look at what the comic book character is and then what Alfred Molina did, the comic book character is a guy in the green bodysuit with orange underwear on who's cackling with his big glasses going up. And what Alfred Molina does is he takes that and he grounds it in a reality that makes you buy that he's the guy cackling up on the building, but that he is also somebody who's Peter Parker's equal and somebody who you yourself are conflicted about. You feel bad for him. He's not just some arch villain. You feel bad for him because you know the struggle, the internal conflict that this guy is feeling, and Alfred Molina is the reason why you feel that. He brings that to that performance.
I mean, what I would say to counter that, though, is I feel like the setup of Alfred Molina, I rewatched Spider-Man 2 a few weeks ago, and I feel like the setup of Alfred Molina as Doc Ock is great. It's very nuanced. It's very layered. And then there's a scene where he awakens and he's talking to his tentacles by himself. And even there, he's conflicted. And then for most of the movie, until after that point, for most of the movie, when you check in with Doc Ock, all that nuance is kind of stripped away. It's just him pretty much being Alfred Molina, the bad guy. He's, he kid that has a scene with Aunt May on top of the building, the train sequence where he talks to Harry Osborn, and then he kidnaps MJ, and then he has another showdown with Spider-Man, and it isn't until his last 5 minutes where that nuance finally comes back. So
if you need some scenery chewed, he's there for you. If you know, he is for most of that movie, and to say that is better than the naturalistic performance of Tom Holland doing all the stuff that I was stating earlier in regards to setting up a new expectation for what this character is going to be for years, also doing a lot of storytelling, also this thing that he's just a lighthearted guy through all that. Obviously you guys didn't see the scene where he was like buried and going to die on his own and let down his Aunt May, let down his Uncle Ben, let down Tony, let down all the Avengers. He had more at stake in that moment than any of these characters have had in any of these movies.
What scene was this at?
The scene where he's buried under the machinery and he's going to let everybody. He's going to let everybody down. The classic Steve Ditko, beautiful illustrated scene. And they did that actual justice in a movie, and it was because he is a good actor. A bad actor in that scene, a bad actor in most of this movie would really fall flat.
But
he's
like
doing yeoman's
it's the
job.
classic Steve Ditko thing that's a Spider-Man moment.
Dan, make this your final thought.
Both of these things, like the things that you're harping on that makes this character relatable because of the performance, I would argue are actually because it's Spider-Man. Of course you're going to relate to him and root for him. Of course you're going to find that to be a heroic moment. He's the main character of the movie. He's the guy that you're already rooting for. A lot of the work is already done, and I'm not saying that these guys were bad in their performances, but I think that when you look at the best performance, you look at something that takes a character from the comics and adds something to it. I disagree with the assertion that the nuance is stripped out of Alfred Molina's Doc Ock. The scene, again, played against himself, against a cartoon arm, which it could look totally stupid. That scene is him basically convincing himself, committing to this line of, I'm going to be a supervillain. Yes, from then on, he is carrying out this task. That's the part of the role that does require him to be the villain. But as you come around full circle, the fact that at the end of the movie, you come back to the fact that he realizes, what have I done? Like, this part of himself that's been buried and suppressed awakens, and he realizes the error of what he's doing. You need to go to those extremes to have that moment at the end. I think what sets Alfred Molina apart is he's not just playing Spider-Man well, because these are Spider-Man themes that are hit upon him in several movies. He's taking a villain that on the page is just a very arch villain, and he's bringing his strengths as an actor to a role to add depth, to flesh it out, to make you sympathize with him, to make him more than what he is. It's not just writing on the Spider-Man themes, it's actually building a great performance that varies between huge and very small. The modulation is great. The fact that he's able to pull it off is great. I still think he stands as the best villain in a Spider-Man movie. I think that's why Spider-Man 2 is regarded largely as one of the better Spider-Man movies, if not the best one. It's not just because Tobey Maguire's in it. It's because he has a great villain to play off of, and that's Alfred Molina. And I think he's the best performance in any of the Spider-Man films. Ed?
Well, this is my thing. Discounting the main character and your appreciation for the greatest performance in a Spider-Man movie is like discounting Beyonce's contribution to your Destiny's Child essay. I don't understand how you can do that. It doesn't seem to make any sense. It's certainly very hipster to pick oh yeah, I like the drummer the best. Oh, that's great, Dan. And you
Drummer and Kelly Rowland Slander. That kind of fight. Yeah. Can we start over? Shall we start over? You waiting for the final thought to start?
I'm merely stating that it is, to my mind, quite a bit easier to do the first human version of this character ever seen on celluloid than to reinterpret this character for an entire new generation. I would argue that one is a greater acting task, and one is pulled off in this movie quite well and doesn't stoop to operatic histrionics for a half of the performance at least. And I just believe that without those stunts, Tom Holland is able to deliver a great, powerful, concrete, setting the foundation for the next 10 years of Marvel movies performance, and that must be lauded. At some point, you must give the lead singer their due. At some point, you must give the best interpretation of Spider-Man their due if we're talking about the best Spider-Man performance in a Spider-Man freaking movie.
All right, Greg.
Nice final argument there, Ed. God.
That's going to kill me.
Okay. Well, what I was talking about with that moment, with the tentacle scene, that's his first scene, Doc Ock, where there is that nuance and that inner conflict that you're talking about. What I was referring to is that from there on out until Tobey Maguire actually destroys whatever is in the back of his neck, and he's able to come down to himself, then we finally get that nuance back. But for most of that movie, he's actually just writing this line of evil dude. He's just, even when he checks in by himself at one point, he's just being an evil guy. And to me, that shift kind of feels a little left field because all that conflict is kind of stripped away. And I also think that some of those moments now, when he's talking to himself, essentially, like I give him a lot of credit for having to pretty much just work with green screen in that moment. In some of those scenes, it just feels a little cheesy as of today. Ed, with Tom Holland, I mean, you keep saying he's like powerful and everything, but I don't really feel that gravitas when I watch Spider-Man Homecoming or even in Civil War. Like, what I think they did with him in there is they really amped up his personality. They really amped up the funny, but there's a lot of depth that I just don't feel present here. With Tobey Maguire and Spider-Man 2, it's like it's easy to write off that it's just the writing of the character, but you need a good actor. You need a great actor if you're going to be in the lead to not only honor the writing but also elevate it. And for me, Tobey Maguire does that. Out of any of these performances, he has the one scene that actually makes me cry when he like confesses to Aunt May the truth of what happened to Uncle Ben, and he's trying to get his personal life in order. He thinks he's stopped being Spider-Man, but in that moment when he starts to tear up, I start to tear up. That overwhelming guilt that he's feeling. And every single scene, he has an inner conflict with whomever he's interacting with. And I think you get the most variety, the most shades of a human being within his performance. Like the way he just looks at Mary Jane. I want to talk about really quick, I'll wrap this up soon. The way he just looks at people when they're talking. Part of acting, they say, is reacting and listening. And Tobey Maguire has the best skills when it comes to that. There's this whole moment where Aunt May's giving this whole speech about being a hero, or when Mary Jane's talking to him and the camera will just slowly pan in on him and you connect with him, you feel him, you relate with him. And while I think Doc Ock is the best Spider-Man villain we've had, I don't think it's the overall best performance. He just didn't actually have enough scenes to truly demonstrate that. And I also feel like Tobey Maguire still brings a lot of that snarkiness when he's in the suit. He still brings a lot of that humor to the character. It's to make that character that relatable and to be that moving. And even the moment where Mary Jane gets kidnapped by Doc Ock and you feel the rage within him, every time you watch that movie, you're like, go kick his ass, man. Like, you just feel it, dude. So yeah, I feel like he has the most moving, emotionally effective, powerful performance of anyone in the franchise.
All right, time. Wow. That was a barn burner. I believe the way this works is now I have to kick it over for Lon. Tell me if I got my facts right.
Do some facts. Sure.
Yeah.
Alfred Molina, born in 1953. Spider-Man 2, released in 2004. So he's about 50 years old. Definitely counts as being middle-aged, I would say. A lot of people did pick up on this in the chat room. I could not find an image of Doc Ock with orange underpants. There's a lot. He's in a green bodysuit. He's either got a yellow belt and boots or an orange belt and boots, but not underpants.
Disqualifies all the Dan's argument.
Ooh, I'm sorry, Dan. That's going to cost.
Also, I'd like to point out Michelle Williams, Kelly Rowland, very talented ladies.
Very talented.
Thank you, Destiny.
Justice for Kelly.
And many wonderful drummers have graced the stage. Your John Bonhams, your Neil Pearts, your Dave Grohls, Elvin Jones, John Coltrane's drummer. We don't want to sass any of these wonderful drummers.
Don't forget the funky drummer. Go ahead.
Yes. Amen to that.
Those are your facts. Sheena E.
Danielle, you are the voice of the people. Have they voted? Did I forget to mention people should be voting on their picks?
They know to vote, but yes,
Okay.
normally we'll go back and we'll do yours because I don't want to say the answer to the poll just in case it doesn't wind up counting. But yes, you guys, you can get in. You have like 2 seconds to go ahead and get in the last vote. We've been telling you guys how to do it on the chat, so it's fine.
Great. Okay, so in my reckoning, Ed, no whispering. Also, you're out.
No whispering.
You're really arguing for the gravitas of one scene, and I feel like the rest of your arguments were really predicated on things that the movie was doing and not necessarily the performance of the way that it was establishing continuity and laying the groundwork for 10 to 15 years of Spider-Man. That's more the job of Spider-Man Homecoming rather than Tom Holland. So it came down to Dan and Greg. Man, this was tough because I feel like you both did really zero in on the performance. I mean, Dan, you knocked him with the same criticism that it was more a function of the movie than it was Tobey Maguire, but I think you countered back really well with the way he's such a supportive scene partner and his looks and reaction shots, and the way you hit Dan back on that you lose the nuance halfway through the movie. I wish I had a fact check on this because I don't know how much of the film Alfred Molina spends in that arch-villain mode versus his nuanced scenes. I wish I could go back and tally it up and see if that criticism really holds true.
I don't have like a chart for that.
Yeah, but you were both really great on this, and you both zeroed in on the performance. That said, I'm giving this one to Greg. Congratulations.
Thanks, Spencer.
All right. Moving on.
Wait, no, there's 3 votes.
Never mind. I haven't noticed you'd be happy for that.
Did you notice how quickly this became a dictatorship? And none of
I am Spencer. Democracy dies.
democracy died, yes.
In relative ignorance. Sorry about that. Rewind. Lon, what else we got?
Well, you know, I felt like this sort of worked out. It's just kind of unfortunately how the topic sort of worked out for them, but I felt like Greg and Ed kind of took each other out by both picking Spider-Mans. I think they both made a case for their Spider-Man being a good naturalistic take, and I think they both hit Dan on Alfred Molina's being a more operatic, sort of a more over-the-top kind of take, but I don't think they won me over in convincing me that that's worse than what they were proposing. I sort of agree that Alfred Molina is doing something bigger and different, but I like that, and I think Dan made a really good case for why that's so effective in the movie, so I'm going with Dan.
Should have just had Spencer vote, damn it.
Yeah, too much. Well,
Entertainment.
it's up to the people.
Okay, let me
As
go
it should
ahead and get that fresh democracy vote.
Democracy dies in darkness, you guys.
With 45% of the vote, we have Alfred Molina in Spider-Man 2, 34% for Tom Holland in Homecoming, 20% for Tobey Maguire in Spider-Man 2.
That was the only round I'm confident about. Now that's all downhill.
Basically, everyone wants to know why no one picked J.K. Simmons.
Yeah, there was a lot of...
It's like in like 5. It's a great. It's like in 5. What 5 minutes total, maybe?
I really
It's tough.
believe that he wants pictures of Spider-Man.
I do.
Pictures of Spider-Man.
Lots of gravitas.
Deep down.
Again, why people should not have a voice. Question number 2. In honor of Midsommar, what is the best horror film of the 21st century? Dun dun dun. All right, guys, a lot of horror movies been made since then. I believe now we'll start with Ed. What's your pick?
If I'm going to call something the greatest horror movie of the 21st century so far, that like means a lot. It means a movie that can be called scary, and it also qualifies as like a game-changing movie. Calling it 21st century seems to intone like a new approach to horror and its subgenres. And to me, that movie is 28 Days Later. I think that movie is a real deal game changer from its use of video to create sort of an immediacy and a realism to all this horrific action, to the fact that it did bring back the zombie genre. I think that this and Walking Dead are in some sort of race as to how to revive it. And also, I think it transcends the zombie genre because it's really about contagion, and it has a lot to say about civility and the social contract and how tenuous that is. It's smart. It's a new movie for a new millennium, and it has a lot to say, and it changed the game. So if those are my criteria, and that's why I'm arguing 20 Days Later.
All right, cool. Dan, Hereditary? Oh, whoops, I just read your answer here. Dan, tell me more about Hereditary.
I mean, honestly, that would be how you would say it. Hipster pick incoming. I would be an utter hypocrite. I would be an utter hypocrite if I didn't say Hereditary. I thought about Shaun of the Dead, but I think it's more of a comedy. It's hard for me to make the case for I love Shaun of the Dead, but yeah, I would be lying to everyone, and everyone would call me out if I said anything else but Hereditary. I know it came out last year. That's how strongly I feel about this movie. I know that perspective is important, but when I look at the horror genre and I look at this film, and it's what does this movie bring to the table that I can say, if you are a horror fan, that you're gonna love about this movie. It is the existential terror, the relatable terror of loss, the really relatable thing, and this is one of my favorite genres of horror, of people thinking you're crazy when you're not crazy, and trying to convince people that this is actually happening and no one will believe you. If it was just those two things, that would be like a real pot boiler kind of a thing. But add on top of that the fact that you have the crazy cult stuff, this idea of a group that's out to get you, the ritual sacrifice if you're a gore hound, that is there, that is present. You have the supernatural element that comes in. It has legitimately a couple of the scariest moments in a movie. The one in particular with Toni Collette in the bedroom. If you haven't seen the movie, I'll just say Toni Collette in the bedroom is one of the scariest moments, one of the scariest images I've seen in a horror movie that I can think of this century. When you look at the genre, I think that it's so varied and there's so many different ways to play it. I mean, there's lots of different kinds of horror. Even as because my mind first went to Hereditary and I looked at all of the other different possibilities that I could go with, and each one I played, I'm like, well, it brings this to the table, but what else does it have? And as far as just like pointing to the genre from a performance level, from a craft level, from a filmmaking level, from a level of just sheer breadth of what is there and different ways to scare you, Hereditary is the one that stands above to me, and that's why it's my choice.
All right. Greg, what's your pick?
Okay, so I went with my favorite, which is an odd one. It's Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell. I adore this movie so much. I saw it twice in the theaters, pretty close to the time it opened, and I just remember being in the theater and hearing so many people screaming and laughing simultaneously. I feel like it's such a
What's
great...
that sound like?
I mean, not simultaneously. You know, like, they laugh and then you want to get nuts? You're listening, Spencer. I like that. There'd be a scene where like there's like gross out gags, and then there'd be a lot of terrifying elements, and it's weaving all these multiple tones. And I find that to be one of the best things about what Sam Raimi, because no one could do what Sam Raimi does. When I think about best horror film of the 21st century, there's literally no other film like this one, because only Sam Raimi can pull this kind of film off. To be able to, the idea why I love the horror in it is because it has this great ability of tension and release. I feel like with a lot of horror movies, we kind of ride this like one tone, this one note. And oftentimes that kind of dilutes down the horror because you're kind of just in this realm that you get used to it after a while. Where in this movie, you have no idea when something scary is going to happen. I know we crap on, it's common on the internet to crap on like jump scares, but when done right, when done effectively, when done with style, when it's earned, Sam Raimi does it the absolute best. There are sequences in here that are just flat out frightening. The lady in the film, the old lady, it's not PC anymore to say gypsy, right? Because that's what they describe her.
Probably not.
The old European woman, I'll say, all right? Yeah. The old European woman is one of the most terrifying people I've ever seen on screen. It was one of those experiences that when I would go anywhere at night, I would just imagine her popping up somewhere and I'd be scared to walk alone places. And it also gets this great leading performance from Alison Lohman where it sets up this wonderful moral quandary of, does she really deserve to go to hell? Because it starts off where she makes a decision that screws over the actress named Lorna Raver, I think. You could look that up, Lorna Raver. And she screws her over, but then you're like, okay, that was kind of a dick move. But then as the film progresses and you're watching like her just go crazy, kill her cat, and pushing away her boyfriend and just going batshit insane throughout the film, you start going, okay, I know she messed up, but does she really deserve to go to hell for this? So I love the debate, I love the characters in it, I love the arcs, but I also love that it's just a purely entertaining horror thrill ride.
Okay, fight it out, y'all.
Drag Me to Hell is fun. It really is. It's fun, but it's. I think that Sam Raimi, this one in particular, was the CG. It doesn't look very good to me. He was still experimenting with effects and stuff. I think it already looks a little dated, even though it's only about 10 years old.
Well, that was part of the intentional points of some of the gimmicks, was to have that B-movie throwback to stuff like Evil Dead in there.
Maybe so, but I think the effects in Evil Dead 2, for example, to me look better than some of the effects in Drag Me to Hell, because I think that sometimes when you use computers, it just doesn't, even if that's the aesthetic you're going for, it still looks dated, whereas a practical effect stuff like that is timeless in a lot of senses. Sure. I think Drag Me to Hell is kind of like Evil Dead 2. I think Evil Dead 2 is more fun, but it's a fun movie. But I mean, would I elevate it to the next echelon other than being a Raimi fan? I wouldn't put it above, a lot of other movies. There's a lot of other movies that have jump scares. The whole idea of tension and release, that's every horror movie. That's the whole thing, is like this idea that you're building up tension and then at some point this release is going to come.
But to have a movie with this much energy, to have a movie with this much of a thrill ride, you just don't get that anymore with horror. Like, honestly, like Hereditary to me is like another kind of Babadook movie. It's a film where
that was my second choice.
Oh, cool. Well, they're very similar, though. Like, we're talking about best film of the 21st century, and I can't think of another movie that's like Drag Me to Hell, where like Hereditary, this idea, like a grieving mother with a strange relationship with her son, and then this mixture of a mental illness, but there's something supernatural actually happening. I felt like Babadook did that also really well and fairly recently to Hereditary's release as well. And I also feel like Hereditary's third act is heavily criticized for a reason, because it really undercuts a lot of the film, and then it has this reveal that makes you look back at the whole movie, and you kind of have this like, Zemo Lex Luthor effect, where you're like, wait a minute, how did this cult exactly pull all that? They would have to have a lot of very convenient things in order to take place, in order for this thing to go down.
Well, I don't think they undercut that. I disagree with that completely. I don't think the third act undercuts anything about the movie. I agree that there are some people that like the third act, some people that don't like the third act, but I don't think that great movies need to necessarily be universally loved. I think that that's one of the great things about Hereditary, is that people can see it and it does spark debate. I think that's what great films do. They're not just a thrill ride or just a scary movie. Drag Me to Hell, when it's over, I saw it and I haven't thought about it since, because it was fun while I was watching it. Hereditary, I still think about it. I still try to piece things together, and did that work, and how did that happen, or I realized something that I missed when I see it the fourth or fifth time. I think that's what makes it great. I don't want to ignore 28 Days Later, though.
It sucks.
Interesting. Go on.
I'm like a henchman chilling in the corner waiting to get kicked by Jackie Chan.
Exactly. One at a time. It's the only way to fight Jackie Chan.
Getting ready. Get ready to get kicked in the neck.
Because I agree that it was definitely something where it was influential in the sense that they were using DV and stuff, and it did help to. It was an era where there were several things that were part of zombies coming back into mythology. But is it the best? I would agree that it's influential, but I don't know if I would say it's the best. I think it just was. It's notable because of its medium, but I don't know if the content of it really rises above a lot of the other zombie movies that are out there. Yeah,
well,
exactly.
but I would certainly argue, though, for this generation, it is much like Richard Pryor doing stuff that Def Jam comedians did later, and then people go, "Oh, Richard Pryor's not funny." When you look at that movie for its time, it was quite innovative, because one thing it did to the whole so-called genre is strip the zombie part away. It isn't. You can't have that layer of distance that, oh, that's not grandma. No, that's grandma. She's still alive, and she's running a 4.340 with a butcher knife ready to break you off, and that's really happening to you. And I think, unfortunately, for both of you guys' movies, in my personal opinion, and I'm not trying to be snarky, but I believe there's something to horror movies having something you can relate to. And I love the fact that it's loss, right? You're saying that loss. Everybody's experienced loss, so that's what that's one of the things that you can relate to in that movie. And I certainly understand that. And in your movie, it's just like one minor transgression with a Romany person. I think that's the proper name.
It's about
and then you can get dragged to hell. One minor transgression.
It's about making a human mistake.
Right. Those are both horrific. But I maintain that the entirety of society turning on you is something that, to a person, everyone can relate to, whether you have a daughter you can lose, or a family with mental illness, things that you can imprint on, or whether you can you engage with people, with fortune crystal balls and stuff. Whether you do any of these things, I just think some of these are quite specific, more specific than the entirety of society turning on you and violating the social contract and biting you to death. I think that's quite scary, and I think they presented that in a new way that transcended what Romero did.
I think they shot it in a new way, but I don't think the story itself is
exactly
new.
Society, that's Dawn of the Dead. That's Romero back in the 70s. Consumers in society.
You're talking about the zombie genre in general, whereas that's...
Which was almost dead, right? But Lon's going to check out on the facts, but I am telling you, I think George Romero had made one movie near around that part.
Land of the Dead.
I don't think that did as well as this. I think that's just because this one had, I think this one was the new take.
But it was also ridiculed heavily. I mean, I remember when it came out, the horror fans were just as upset at this movie as they were. They're like, well, that's
real
not
zombies don't run.
Zombies.
Right. Well, I mean, that sort of stuff is the criticism of dullards, much like the third act of your movie. Mm-hmm. I get that it's a big Rube Goldberg machine, and I personally kind of like that. but I could see how people would be turned off by it. One thing I don't like about horror, and I think it's available in both you guys' movies. In my movie, you can survive. There is a way you can make it out. And you don't have to get a magic reprieve and barely luck out. You can actually survive the adventure if you're tough enough and gritty enough to survive society turning on you. Whereas in your movie, the people in that movie are doomed. If you go back through it, they're doomed.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of takes some of the horror out of it for me. Once I find out that they could never have escaped, it becomes a sort of elevated torture porn to me.
I think for me, even more going into this movie, going into Hereditary, and you're like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And then you realize at the end of it that not only could they were they ill-fated, but that they were being manipulated this entire time. They never stood a chance. I think that makes it even more horrific. I think it's a much more conventional approach to be like, oh, you can escape. Like that to me, it takes some of the horror, the pressure off for me, because when you know that there's some kind of escape, then you're just waiting for that to happen, as opposed to this idea of like it's a hopeless situation. That's
But
terrifying.
wouldn't you agree that there is no tension if you cannot win? Much like there's no bravery if you cannot die.
If Hereditary starts with them saying like, here's the story of a doomed family, then yes,
Leave the theater.
there's not a Star Wars crawl that says that no, you get to the end of it and you're like, oh my god, that's terrifying.
I know, but when
that
you
reality dawn on you,
I get that, but when you do get to the end, you realize they could never have survived. Whereas when you look at my film, there's so many times that person could have died. I mean, a drop of blood in your eye and you're a zombie, or rather you're a rager or whatever they call them in the movies. I just think that's overall scarier and more relatable.
So guys, I'm hearing a lot of personal preference, for better or worse, and a lot of you are making convincing cases for why you enjoyed that movie the most.
Sure.
What I want to hear in your final arguments, and I guess we'll start with Greg, is what sets it apart? What is unique about this film compared to the other 21st century horror films?
Well, I think with like the kind of art house horror that we're getting with films like Hereditary, and I kind of feel like 28 Days Later could be sort of lumped into that category too, is you sort of get this like one dreadful tone throughout. And a lot of them are Hereditary especially is a slow burn. And I don't feel like movies like Hereditary has a low audience score for a reason. It's because it's just not something that is attainable for the masses. If we want to talk about best movie, I don't want to just talk about movies that are only appealing to cinephiles, to the junkies of the screen or something like that. You know, I don't want to just talk about those the film buffs. It has to be a movie that can be universally appealing. Like Hereditary is not a film I'm going to be like, hey babe, you want to go watch Hereditary right now? Or I'm with a group of friends on their Halloween. Let's put on Hereditary. That's going to be like, it's slow. It's a slow burn. And honestly, at times it drags. It's kind of boring. And it takes a while for thrills to kick in. And 28 Days Later, the exciting stuff is all in the first half. And then the last half gets kind of lost in what it's trying to do. It doesn't even really feel like a zombie movie at that point. And like we've talked about, that it's like you've pretty much described the zombie genre, but nothing will really makes 28 Days Later super unique. With my movie, you're getting a wide variety of tones that are all still under the aesthetic of being something that's frightening. And maybe you weren't exactly terrified by it. I think most critics and a lot of audience members were definitely terrified while watching that film. And to have a pulse to it, where everything about that movie is so meticulously calculated, it's specifically edited, the mixture of sound designs in it for every single frame of that movie, the ability to really maneuver your angles in order to enhance the narrative of the character's emotional experience is brilliant. And I think too that she is a very relatable character. We've all made mistakes and we've all felt like unjustly punished for our mistakes, and that's the ride that she's going on here. And my film also has like an actual defining villain that is just breathtakingly scary. That whole scene in the parking lot where she's trying to kill her, to have a how many horror movies can you say you start laughing and you start screaming? You start laughing and you start screaming. You can't say that with a lot of movies. I'm not saying you do it at the same time, Spencer. I'm saying
different times.
At different moments, getting grossed out. As far as like the effects go with the film too, that's meant to be intentional to release that tension. To have like she pops out, you're terrified, and then the effects show up and it's kind of goofy, but that's the whole point of it. And I also think my movie, for a horror movie, has the scariest ending of them all. Hereditary, a lot of people are like, I don't know what that's about, or people are like, too much of an exposition dump. 28 Days Later, sure, has like a hopeful ending note. My ending, when you have like this wonderful performance by Justin Long, a very sincere performance, when this dude who's been doubting his girlfriend's beliefs the entire time, watches his girlfriend literally being dragged to hell, and then it's just a shot on his face, and he's got a tear going down. He looks at the button, because there is that element that she had a chance to actually survive this, Ed, but she just put the wrong thing down in the grave. When you see that shot on his face, that leaves you haunting. It smashes the Drag Me to Hell, the title, and I remember being in the theaters, everyone being like, oh shit, like that is, it's the most frightening ending out of all these three.
All right, Ed.
Well, I think it's very easy to look back on 28 Days Later right now because it changed the game so hard and go, oh, it was always there. It's like saying that Batman 1989 was always going to be a success. No, it was not. The guy who had the rights to that had him in his pocket for 20 years, and there was no takers. It was the coldest damn thing ever. And that's what the zombie genre was. Ironically enough, it was dead. And then this movie comes back and adds an element of it isn't about dead shuffling bums anymore. It is about mankind turning on you with all the lividity and speed that it can. And that is more scary than shambling zombies you can shuffle away from or pretend you're one of them and sort of put some dead flesh on you and stink yourself up and walk amongst them. These guys aren't falling for that jazz, dude. And that was revolutionary at the time. And it is the most game-changing of these movies. It isn't simply a haunted house story. It isn't big but scarier. You know what I mean? It's a real that lady's like a Zoltar. It's a real you need to understand the rules of a genre to deconstruct it, and you need to know the inner workings of something to bring it back to life. And Alex Garland and Danny Boyle brought the zombie genre back to life with this movie. And I think that's important. And I think as far as a well-made film, it is the most distinctive looking of these, with Sam Raimi on one side and Ari Aster, a new young genius on each side. I think this movie's still the most visually distinctive. That goes towards being good and towards being groundbreaking. I think all of these things combined with great central performances by people who didn't even seem to be acting because of the immediacy in which it was shot. I think this vaults this over something that, frankly, is going to. I think Dan's movie might be a lauded curiosity, and I know that this is a crowd pleaser amongst the unpredictable, yell at screen crowd. But I really think this movie's going to last the test of time.
All right.
20 Days Later.
Dan, why your film is the best of the 21st century?
It's what you said. What sets it apart? And I think with 28 Days Later, you can certainly debate it's a great film in the zombie genre. I think with Drag Me to Hell, it's a great film in the Sam Raimi filmography or in the ghost genre. I think what sets Hereditary apart is that, number one, it's not easily categorized. You can't really put it into a box. It's its own. It's like David S. Pumpkins. It's its own thing. It's hanging out there ready to jump out at you. If you want to talk about relatability, which is something that Greg brought up with his relatable characters, again, I think that it plays on so many different levels that you are going to find somewhere to relate on it, whether you're somewhat afraid of losing a parent, a sibling, a child, whether you're afraid of ghosts, whether you're afraid of, there is the concept of the people that you know and love turning on you is present in this film. The scary villain. I think that the scariest villain is in my movie because it's the person who comes to you with open arms and says, I'm a friend. And they end up being the person that sells you down the river and seals your fate and your family's fate. That's the scariest villain to me, is the one that you don't know is a villain. That isn't a crazy lady who gave you a hex and then threw up blood in your mouth. Like, yeah, of course that's the villain. I like the villain that's hiding behind a smile. I think that's the scarier villain. If you want to talk about craft, editing, sound design, I will put the cinematography, the editing, the sound design of Hereditary up against any of the technical things. I don't think that 28 Days Later has the most distinctive visual style. It was shot on DV. that is a distinct visual style, but the way that the composition of the shots, the lighting, the way that they do things like the push in at the beginning of my film into the house, into the doll's house, and you realize that this is a family. It sets the stage for this movie. So I would put the artisanship of this movie, the technicians that put this movie together against either one of these two movies any day. And then really the thing that I want to fight back against the most is this idea that it cannot be a great movie unless it has universal appeal. I think that is 100% false. Some of the greatest movies of all time don't have what you would call universal appeal. Vertigo is not a movie that is going to appeal to everybody universally. It's also not the kind of movie that you're just, hey babe, let's throw on Vertigo and watch it. That doesn't mean it's not a great film. It's just that different films serve different functions. So I don't think you should ding Hereditary because some audiences didn't like it or because it doesn't have universal appeal. I think that's the sign of a challenging film. I think that's the sign of a film that's not just a crowd pleaser or the new entry in a genre that's already popular that may have helped to reinvigorate it. That is the sign of a film that is singularly connects with an audience, and maybe that could be a negative connection, but that means that it stands apart. It's not just another piece of a predictable genre. It is its own, it stands by itself. And I think that Hereditary, over time, will come to be regarded as one of the great films of the early 21st century. And I think in the horror genre is going to stand above both of these.
All right, like that's time. Woo.
Dan's good at this game.
Everyone's good at this game. Excellent work all around. Let's go to the couch or chairs.
Some facts. A lot of people did want me to point out. Technically, in 28 Days Later, they're not zombies. They're still alive. They're called infected. They have a virus. So a lot of debate about, is it technically zombies or is it just a monster movie where we're fighting the infected? We do say Romani people instead of the G word. Just putting that out there. That actress's name is Lorna Raver. She's been featured in many TV shows as well as the old Romani woman from
She's actually
Dragon
American. Isn't it crazy? Yeah.
What was that?
No, I'm just saying she's actually American. I'm surprised when I saw her in interviews. I was like, whoa, wow.
And then we had some discussions about these zombie/infected timeline. 28 Days Later was 2002. George Romero returned to the zombie genre in 2005 with Land of the Dead, and then he did Diary of the Dead in 2007 and Survival of the Dead in 2009.
All right,
Those
awesome.
are your facts.
Those are my facts. So then, how's this work? Who judges first?
Me?
It's up to you.
Lon or yourself?
You pick.
Lon, why don't you start?
I thought all great arguments. Movies that I probably would not have picked, but I enjoyed hearing everybody's sort of reasoning for them. I will say, yeah,
Dude, we're all hipsters.
just like Dan kind of made this point, I feel like Greg kind of lost it a little for me at the end, focusing a little too much on mainstream appeal, which especially in the horror genre, I just feel like it's too hard to tell. It's very subjective. I don't know if I would have gone like that. So it really came down to Ed versus Dan for me, and I really liked a lot of what Ed had to say about 28 Days Later and its impact on the genre and how it sort of revitalizes part of the genre, and a lot of what we love about zombie movies today sort of came down through 28 Days Later. That resonated a lot with me, so I'm going with Ed.
Okay. Wow. I thought that this was not going to be the case, but I'm going with Ed too.
Jeez.
Dan, I feel like you.
Faint praise, raining down.
I'm just saying,
May.
even though I don't feel like we heard the most out of you, but I do think that you really set yourself apart as for what sets it apart within the context of the 21st century. And Dan, you really undercut your argument at the end there when you said that you can't put Hereditary into a box. It's a question about the best horror film, and to me, horror is a genre with pretty distinct rules, and to argue about why it transcends or isn't or could be horror or could
I
not
didn't
be.
mean horror in general. I meant like a type of horror film, but that's okay. That's my...
We only go forward here, and Greg, I just think that they ganged up on you a lot.
Jerks.
The idea that it was universally appealing made it the best film. Like, no, there's plenty of popular films that come out. all the time in that genre. So I guess we can ask what the fans wanted, but once again, just a...
Doesn't matter, but we'll
yeah.
have... And so this one, I'll say, this was literally like neck and neck and kept changing. If we did this in 30 seconds, it would be different. But the fans did have 42% for Hereditary, 20% for 28 Days Later, 16% for Drag Me to Hell. We got a lot of mentions for the new Suspiria, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, all the Conjuring verse.
Nice.
And I think I've discovered I pronounce horror wrong. Just after hearing everyone say it, I pronounce it horror. Horror.
What's wrong with that?
Horror.
Some people say
That's not how
horror.
anyone
Some people say horror.
Okay.
Fine.
I think I do it wrong.
It doesn't matter.
Not complex about it.
We could do this all day. But instead, let's move on to question number 3. Which is, ding ding, the new film Yesterday is all about a guy who wakes up in a world where the Beatles never existed. Oh, my parents just died. What's the best movie about a real musician or band? I believe we're starting with you, Dan.
Yes, I picked one of my favorite movies, Amadeus, about Mozart and the conflict between Mozart and Salieri. Not only a great movie, but what I mean, a great movie on its own terms. But I also love what it has to say about not just musicians, but artists, and how you can be a great artist, and if you just happen to be born in the wrong time, that talent is not always enough. Or even though you can be extremely talented, if there's somebody else out there that's more talented than you are, then you may just have the bad circumstance of the times that you live in. I love how it gets into the conflict between what is genius and what is talent. When is success deserved and who deserves it and why? I think that's something when you talk about music and musicianship and just art. These are themes that artists themselves deal with all the time. And I love that instead of just being about art and about music, this actually goes into the conflicts between artists and musicians, and goes into the like how someone can be so flawed and yet have such a singular genius that even though you resent the hell out of them, at the end you have to just sort of respect what they have and figure out how to live with it. I love the depth and the complexity of that relationship between Mozart and Salieri, the way they bring in the music. Of course, Mozart wrote beautiful music. I love how they go into the creation of that. Not certainly a modern musician, but one of the most important musicians of all time.
All right, great. Greg.
Yeah, when I think about this question of like, what's the best movie about a real musician or a band, I think about what I want from that kind of movie. And I do want to see a lot of the music really help drive the narrative, and more than just like, oh, let's cut to them creating a song, but really see the meaning of what the song meant for them as individuals or as a group, or why their music specifically, more than, oh, they're just they're great performers, but what made their songs so distinct and unique, and why they connected with people. And of course, I do want a good story. And I picked the movie, the one that just connected with me the most, Walk the Line. I know that Walk the Line on paper, but if you look at its outline, it can be a little by the numbers for sure. But it's one of those cases of, sure, the outline of it can be a little by the numbers like Bohemian Rhapsody, but then you could have a different execution that feels a lot more different and distinct, like something like people have been comparing a lot of like Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocket Man for a reason. One feels like a VH1 movie and the other one feels like an actual movie. And for me here, what I love is how of an intimate experience this is for the character of Johnny Cash. I think Joaquin Phoenix gives an incredible performance in this film. He embodies him, handpicked personally by Johnny Cash. He actually learned to play the guitar for 6 months. He learned to sing. If you listen to Joaquin Phoenix in interviews, he has an actual like soft-spoken voice, but he had to really develop his voice to have a little bit of a deeper, I don't know the right word. It's a deeper voice than when he's singing, okay? But also, what I love is it doesn't just like have one of those things where it just cuts to him performing. Whenever there's a performance there doing music, it's driving the narrative. It's moving the narrative forward, and there's still an acting, emotional performance while the songs are actually taking place. It's also a beautiful love story that at first you're kind of like not really rooting for because it starts off as an affair, but then as it progresses, you really start to root for them. And I think to take something like that, which challenges an audience, but then by the end you feel so heartwarmed and touched by them getting together, I think is just beautiful. and Reese Witherspoon gives a brilliant performance in the film. She won the Oscar for it. To me, this, yes, it is the crowd pleaser, I think, of the three. We haven't heard Ed's yet, but this is the crowd pleaser of the three, but it also still has a palpable air of authenticity that I feel like you get the best of both worlds here with Walk the Line.
All right, Ed, what'd you pick?
All right. Well, I picked a movie where I really think the movie transcends the musician, but also informs what you think about the musician, and that is What's Love Got to Do with It, about the life story of Tina Turner, the great Tina Turner. Basically, the movie, I think the way it sets itself apart from other movie biopics is it isn't really about her music making her significant. You know, a lot of these movies are about this music makes this person valuable. Watch this movie, look at this beautiful genius make this music. That's not what this movie's about. This movie's about a person who happens to be a musician who's going through some of the worst crap for 30 damn years and doesn't even understand her own value, doesn't understand what family actually means, what love actually means. So that at the end, when she's singing What's Love Got to Do with It, it's a powerful anthem of throwing off the shackles of what she thought love was. You know what I mean? And in that way, when it dovetails back to the music, it has more of an emotional impact than any other musical biopic I've ever seen, because the songs are actually punches that she's throwing at her previous oppression. And I think that that's dandy.
It is indeed dandy. Dan?
He went first.
What do you think?
I get to punch back first. Fun.
We're gonna take turns now.
I was gonna make
Spencer decide who fights first.
Usually it's like a game.
Sorry, I was gonna make a dandy pun. I bailed on it. All of you start talking at the same time.
And
tell Dan why Amadeus sucks. Go now.
Come on, you and me do the double team on Dan. That's a tag team match, Daddy.
You all lose a point.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll start. I love everybody's movies here, and I'm not doing the Joe Star thing, even though Joe Star's one of my best friends. So I'd love to be compared to Joe. Yeah, he's really great. He's a really great guy. So I really do, really love each of you guys' movies. Amadeus is great. It's a great, very fictionalized account of a real person who is very music. And I know you knew it was coming.
You just set him up.
It's the Bibiani effect. No, I've studied this. I know what I'm doing. It's the Kobayashi Maru, but I still might win. Now, look, I think that it's not a knock on it, but by definition, I don't know that the musicality in that story can connect in the way that I just outlined in mine. The musicality in my movie is, like I stated, it's punches against depression. It's a real expression of this person fighting back against something. I love Walk the Line, and I love that the tortured life that you can live as a dude like him in the 50s, drinking a whole bunch and cheating on your wife and watching your baby brother in a laundry cauldron. Oh, wait a minute, that was in Ray, the movie that this thing is just like down to the numbers. Walk the Line is it's good, dude. It's good, but it's good in the same way that hotel art is. All the paint is in the proper places. It's a boat. It's a guy. It's a barn. Yeah, I get it, but I believe that Salieri's story of unrequited horror and my story of a woman using her music to defeat. Your guy got kicked in the stomach by an ostrich, and they didn't even put it in the movie. You know what I mean? It's not, to me. It's
none
the
of our
least
movies are fully historically accurate.
Let's go right now. Let's get it out of the way. I know that's coming. No, it's not historically. None of these movies are historically accurate pictures of what happened.
Hey, she learned Buddhism in 20 minutes from a lady that used to swim back up. I believe that.
All of the events are mixed up and mixed around, and the dates are changed, and the orders changed.
I agree.
So, yeah.
I agree. I'm not fighting against that. I even said it was.
I'm not going to try to bring up the whole universal appeal thing of Amadeus. I mean, it is like almost a 3-hour movie.
There's nothing wrong with complicated, good, long movies.
Don't you diss Milos Forman.
I'm sorry. Like this idea that because Amadeus is long, that people can't connect to it, I don't understand that.
Well, I feel like when I watch Amadeus, I'm not even watching exactly a movie about Amadeus. Like
It's about Amadeus and Salieri.
It's more about I can't remember.
Salieri.
Yeah,
Also
I'm
a real
not
musician.
intelligent enough
Also
to
a real
pronounce his name.
Yes. Salieri made some bangers. Don't sleep.
I don't even when I watch that movie too, I don't even really like. I know all our movies are not accurate. At the same time, though, when I watch that movie, I'm like, nah, that's just not accurate. Like,
Really?
I just get that vibe.
Were you a Mozart scholar before you
No, I
watched
wasn't.
Amadeus?
Just the whole performance of how Amadeus. What's that actor's name who plays him?
Tom Hulse.
Yeah, I just like it's fart. It's like the whole like kind of farting joke personality that he has about him. I just did not buy it at all. I thought it was kind of an annoying performance, and I don't really feel like it. When I watch a movie like this about musician or band, I want to see something that does really highlight a lot of what makes the music so special. And I feel like you do get a different kind of tale here, and it is a great movie. At the same time, I don't really get that extra element of that what I would really want from that kind of film.
First of all, I have a big problem with your music. Your movie about the music, which is that they changed the music.
With country music.
I don't like that Joaquin Phoenix sang the songs. Johnny Cash had such a distinctive voice. That's always been a barrier for me, is that they changed the music in the movie about the music. I understand that might just be, but that was a big barrier for me.
I get pulled out when I see that. Like, and what's love got to do with it? With Angela, I think Angela Bassett is an amazing performance. Whenever she's singing, I'm like, that's a great lip singing performance. But I get really pulled out knowing that I'm so aware and watching a movie at that point.
At least she didn't do a school play version of Tina Turner's vocals.
All right,
Joaquin Phoenix is the people that are like downloading and buying the versions that Joaquin Phoenix had. It was great.
McDonald's is the most popular restaurant. Who cares? I don't think that's a point.
This is also the first time I'm hearing about like Joaquin Phoenix not enjoying that.
I agree with you that the only not honestly, Dan's movie is pretty damn good. It's long, it's arduous, but it's worth it.
It's not arduous.
It's a little bit. And that performance, I agree with you. The performance is a little grating over that amount of time. But what I will say is what it is to me lacking, the only thing it's actually lacking, is it is more about Amadeus's genius than Salieri's life. And it's about both of those things more than the actual music.
It's about the conflict.
But mine is
them.
about the music, and Homeboys is like it's like a songbook. It's a songbook with like screenplay parts for the affairs.
If we're talking about a movie about real musician or band, the most powerful music scene out of all of our movies when. I mean, it's parody great in Walk Hard, but the reason why Walk Hard chose parody because we talked about this earlier. I feel like it's an iconic scene in biopic movies when he's doing like the gospel singing thing, and then he's told exactly like we've heard this kind of tune a billion times before. Give us something different. That immediate moment actually changed my whole perspective on how I view music. I found that I wanted to search for meaning in it. Like my dad listened to Johnny Cash. I wasn't a Johnny Cash fan. There's no biopic I've seen that actually made me go out and go, wow, I have a whole new appreciation for the lyrics of Johnny Cash, and that movie really contributed that element. My friends and I, who all saw it together, we all started like buying Johnny Cash albums because of that.
But I think that's the downfall of both of your movies, which is that both of these movies are great if you're a fan of Johnny Cash or Tina Turner,
I wasn't
or you
a fan
want to
of
learn,
Johnny Cash.
or you learn more, and now you're more into Johnny Cash or Tina Turner. But it's still tied so much to just specifically these two people. Whereas I think that the Mozart and Salieri. First of all, I disagree completely that it's not about the music. The entire culmination of the film is that scene where Mozart is on his deathbed dying, writing that last thing, and Salieri's like, I can't keep up. It makes the art of music composition like a cliffhanger scene of just like trying to get the notes down and trying to get them out, and you can hear the music, and it brings you into the mind of a composer as he's writing music in a way that no other movie has done before. And I don't think you have to be just a fan of Mozart to appreciate the movie, because it is about both Mozart's genius and Salieri struggling to live in
My only rebuttal to the point that you just made specifically is that you have to be, or it's beneficial to be a Johnny Cash or a Tina Turner fan before you watch these movies. Nay, I say. I became a fan of Tina Turner watching what she went through. I wasn't a kid in the 80s jamming out to freaking Mad Max soundtrack or nothing, but I liked what her music represented after I saw her life. And to me, that is a great trademark of a musical biopic. Is that after it, it's like, you know, you watch some of these great band documentaries. You want to listen to the music afterwards. The great biopic is even more effective at introducing a new music than that, because it has the emotional element. And I think that is frankly very, very, very present in mine, somewhat present in his, and less present in yours. I do agree with you though. That's a very beautiful scene at the end. It's a beautiful scene about math. But I think we're presenting things about music at this point.
But it's literally about writing music. It's
It's about writing
math, it's
music,
about writing
but
music.
it's the math that
experiencing
becomes
the
music.
music.
You were
experiencing the
inside the
music.
process of actually going inside this guy's brain as he's attempting to write that you're brought into this genius. It is 100% about the music.
It's an analytical approach, but it's not an emotional approach.
All right,
I
we're
feel.
chasing our own tail. I'm
Emotional
calling time. Good, great round, guys. Great
No
round.
final thoughts?
I feel like the thoughts were relatively final.
Finalized? Sure.
Factualize us.
Amadeus' theatrical cut is 161 minutes long, 2 hours and 41, pretty close to 3. Amadeus, the film, it has been criticized for being historically accurate, but not the poop and fart jokes. Mozart loved jokes about farts, butts, and poop. In fact, there's a famous story about Margaret Thatcher got very upset with the guy who wrote the play that Amadeus is based on. Like, why would you include all that crude stuff about this brilliant composer? He was like, because it's actually true. That part is all based on real history. Those are your facts.
Awesome. Okay, well, I guess I'll start off. Greg, that hotel art line that walked the line is the hotel art of music biopics. That's just killer. No, he killed you with that.
Yeah.
That it is like Ray, that it is like Walk Hard, the kind of by the numbers of it, by your own admission, kind of sunk it for me off the bat. It was down to Ed and Dan. And it's really just a matter of preference of whether that music was, or whether the movie was transcendent to make a point about this person's life, or whether the movie was transcendent to say something maybe about music in general. Dan, I think he put it so beautifully, tying it into the theme of the film and what it was able to evoke while still being about the characters. I'm leaning Dan on this one. Lon, Danielle.
You want to do it? Let's go.
You guys are so married.
Everything is crazy today.
You want to do it? Let's go.
Let's do
Stop
this.
poking at me.
All right. Well, according to the polls right now, with 40%, it is Amadeus. With 30%, we've got Walk the Line. With 28%, we've got What Love's Got to Do with It.
Oh, rock me.
All right.
They're going with Dan.
So you got rocked Amadeus. Amadeus rocked it.
You know what? As long as we're all, I was going to go with Dan as well. I really liked Ed's argument about how the music and the themes of the movie kind of come together. I thought they really dinged Greg a lot on the sort of great American songbook. Like, yeah, we all like those songs, but it's kind of just a nice movie that's full of a lot of good songs. But I thought Dan really tied the whole thing together. Like, the complete picture of why Amadeus was such a great movie. Holistically, that was the question. So I would go with Dan as well.
Good luck,
All right.
Ed.
Well, yeah.
Avenge.
Great game. Thanks for playing.
I'm glad you voted for me that one time.
Yes, you got it. Never pick your favorites. That's,
Never pick your favorites. I shouldn't have experimented.
surefire way to lose. But now it's down to Dan and Ed in the speed round, and
Yeah,
it's still
Hereditary.
anybody's game, just a 1-point difference.
Oh, my God.
First to 4 is going to win. The rules apply as before. As always, whoever answers first gets 20 seconds. The next person gets 20 seconds, then 10-second rebuttal, 10-second rebuttal. Between me, Lon, and Danielle herself, not the people, will determine who gets
Sorry,
the
the
point.
people.
Yeah.
Sorry, the people.
Sorry, the people.
They're not so great.
That's like a 90s
Yeah.
band name.
Sorry, the people. Opening
people,
for
yeah.
Toad the Wet Sprocket. So, Lon, you'll be keeping time for me?
I got it.
All right. Time begins when you answer. And the first question is... Paul Rudd has joined the cast of the sequel Ghostbusters 2020. Oh, I didn't know that. What is the better Paul Rudd performance? Scott Lang in Ant-Man or Brian Fantana in Anchorman?
Ant-Man.
Brian Fantana.
Ed, you begin.
I'm picking Ant-Man because he has to carry a movie. He has to carry a movie. He also has to be deferent to other superheroes. He has to set up a whole new way of being super and introduce that to everybody. He's super charming. He has a wonderful daughter. The rapport is there from the beginning. We feel him as an estranged father. We feel him as an ex-con. It's a really nuanced performance, whereas I do believe Fantana is a little one note.
I think it's easy to stand out when you're the lead of the movie and it's your job to carry the movie. I think it's harder to stand out when you're surrounded by other people who are as good or better than you at comedy. And the fact that we still remember Brian Fantana and Sex Panther and all that stuff is a testament to how good his performance is. He holds his own with everyone else who's also trying to steal the movie simultaneously. It's not just him playing the hero, it's him carving a niche out.
I would argue that it's easier to lay down salvos of beautiful comedy when you're a directed missile aimed at one specific target amount of minutes. And I also think that he is better.
Interesting. Dan, your rebuttal?
Interesting tactic.
I think that Ant-Man is also very tightly scripted, whereas the success of Anchorman relied on him coming up, also improving. That's a great thing to do with the performance. I think that helps him. And not only did he come up with great stuff, he came up with great stuff on the spot that was as good as everything else.
Ooh, good stuff. Well, Ed, I won't hold that really dumb point against you because I think otherwise your point about him carrying the movie and his charm and your rebuttal to Dan about how it's easier to maybe pick your spots as part of an ensemble, I'm leaning towards you for that round. Lon?
I actually went the other way. I thought I really liked Dan's point about it's harder to stand out when you're surrounded by Will Ferrell trying to be funny, Vince Vaughn trying to be funny, all these other guys in that crazy ensemble. I was going to go with Dan on this one.
Okay, Danielle, break the tie.
All right, so just I am gonna hold that against him because not because it's a dumb point, but because it's like anytime someone gives up at the end of the round, I always hold it against them. Okay. And Ed gave up, and I love you, so I gotta give it to Dan.
All right, damn it! Come on, man! Never give up.
This is the last one. I did. Okay, there's brain farts and there's giving up. I kind of categorize that as a brain fart.
You
Let's
just
go.
said it more strongly.
There was no salvage. This isn't Cybertron. There's no salvage.
Oh man! All right. Well, that brings us to game point for question number 2. Henry Cavill will play Sherlock Holmes. What? In a new movie.
Wait, what?
Millie Bobby Brown is going to play his little sister,
What?
and he's going to play her older brother, Sherlock Holmes.
Did someone draw this out of a hat?
This
Movie Mad Libs.
I don't make them up.
The question, however, is who should play Henry Cavill's Dr. Watson?
Ben Affleck.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Bill Hader.
Ooh.
Okay.
I think that Ben Affleck, first of all, is very good at sitting dejected next to Henry Cavill, much like Dr. Watson is next to Sherlock Holmes all the time. In addition, I just think that would be a very interesting duo to bring those two together in a different context. And I think that you need that sort of smaller, grounded thing to let Henry Cavill kind of flex himself as Holmes. I think you need a big personality.
I think Watson needs to be somebody that is basically Sherlock Holmes, not a bodyguard, but certainly his man that gets in the fisticuffs with him. He has to be able to do that, which Bill Hader can do. He's shown that in Barry. You also need an intuitive actor who's very good at listening and listening with their face and their eyes, which is a great thing that Hader does. During all of Sherlock's monologues, looking at Hader's face as he processes the information or disagrees.
I feel like Hader's too big of a personality too. He's going to be trying to steal the movie along with Henry Cavill. You need somebody who can be his scene partner, but let Cavill have the stage. I want to see Bill Hader do his own crazy, wacky take on Sherlock Holmes.
Bill Hader comes from a tradition of collaborative theater. Live even. So I do believe he could handle playing his part in a movie of this magnitude, and I do believe he could rein it in because he is a great actor.
Ooh, okay. Some hot stuff there. So why don't we start with the chairs? Lon, who do you got?
I really liked Ed. I thought Ed talked more about the character of Watson as opposed to a person we'd like to see with Henry Cavill again. So I'm going with Ed.
Danielle?
I have to agree for that exact same reason. I felt like Ed was really about what he would bring to the character and not about specifically like that pairing, and I liked that better.
Awesome. All right. Well,
I said that really because I love that joke about Ben Affleck sitting.
That's a great joke. That's a good joke. And
That may end up biting me in the ass, but I just
Strong opening
That's a great joke.
Hey, as a person who gets killed for going for the bit,
I went for the
bravo for never commit to the bit, never pick your favorites. We're learning so much today. And your back's against the wall, but you're still alive. Question number 3. Spider-Man Far From Home hits theaters next week. What's the better movie? Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3 or The Amazing Spider-Man 2?
Spider-Man 3.
Who spoke first? Did you say 2? What'd you say?
well, I said, duh. To be totally honest with
I thought
you,
it kind of
chat.
sounded like me, so it wouldn't matter. It turns out like you said the first, which would be Amazing Spider-Man 2.
The Spider-Man 3.
Yeah. So wait, what did
Right, there's no
Dan-
the Spider-Man 3.
I said Spider-Man 3.
The Spider-Man.
He's the Spider-Man.
No, I'll go.
AS2.
Spider-Man ASM 2.
Yeah.
I'll go that, and you go.
Two flawed films, but I actually rewatched Spider-Man 3 recently, and I was struck by how good the first half of this movie is. Thomas Hayden Church as Sandman has a great motivation. You have that wonderful scene where Peter talks to Aunt May, and she talks about how Ben proposed to her. You have that's the best Aunt May Peter scene in the entire trilogy. Yes, once you get to Venom, it gets a little bit messy, but Amazing Spider-Man 2 is messy throughout. That thing is worse.
How worse is it? I do believe that Amazing Spider-Man 2, while absolutely flawed and horrible, has wonderful gaffes in it, like when Electro gets jumped in with the electric eels, but they're actually moray eels who are not electric, but they're just more scary looking. Real stupid stuff like that. We have Paul Giamatti in a big rhino suit. Somebody gets smacked with a...
I agree, it's terrible. It's ridiculous. It's Joel Schumacher level bad. There are some actual good things in Spider-Man 3. We talk about the bad things, but there are some really strong elements in that movie.
You assume I agree that there are good things, and people laugh and act like there were some good things. There were not. There was a bunch of ham-fisted crap about some fake dude we never heard of killing Uncle Ben. We got a bunch of dumb stuff with Venom, the circumstance, but which Venom comes in the movie. Ugh.
Oh, okay. Well, and you didn't manage to say one positive. So I think I'm going with Dan on this one. What do you guys think?
Your Ed's argument was basically why it's so bad. And while I will always champion those arguments, that's not what the question was.
That was like seppuku.
Yeah. You guys pointed out the worst things about the movie.
I may tell you what I said at the end is absolutely true. There's a lot in Spider-Man 3 that sucks balls.
Sure.
I agree.
Like the whole thing. But go ahead. Anoint the king. I love him too.
Look, yeah, Dan, you win again.
All right.
Release the doves. They're all dead. And so are we.
I'm sorry we live in a John Woo movie.
This means I'm going to lose next week in round one is what this week is, because I thought I might go 2-2 throughout this gauntlet. So to go through these last 4 shows unscathed, I'm perfectly fine with whatever happens next week. It's just it's icing on the cake. So
Well, there you
see what
go.
happens.
Isn't it you against like 15 other people
Yes,
or something?
it is me
We'll find
against-
some way to make you lose, even if you have to fight
We're all
with,
in a group text.
using
Someone
no vowels.
Someone can come in at the end with a speed round and just take the belt right away.
Yeah, that's just how life works sometimes.
Yes,
isn't
it is, Spencer.
So, again, thank you guys for watching. Let's do some one last time. Where can people find you online, Greg?
YouTube.com/TheReal. It's probably, I don't care. I didn't get a point. This is the most fun I've ever had. YouTube.com/TheRealRejects. Yeah.
Never have fun. The third unwritten rule of movie fights.
And don't go with your favorite picks. That's what I learned today.
Yeah, you can hit me up at www.seppuku.com. I'll get all messages sent there.
We take no credit for what is actually found at seppuku.com.
no, God, no. But yeah, again, thank you guys for having me on. This is super fun. I feel like this is my home. Win, lose, or draw, this is one of the best shows in LA, regardless. And yeah, Ed GREER, you can get me at Ed GREER Destroys on Twitter and Instagram every Monday and Wednesday on Screen Junkies, and listen to my podcast, Nerd Goat Podcast, nerdgoatpodcast.com.
Awesome. Dan, you're here.
I'm here. I'll be here next week for Last Spider Standing. Hashtag long movies can be good too. It's the truth. But
I was just saying movie fight shit, man. I don't mean half of what I was saying.
Well, they shouldn't say it was better.
Don't pull the curtain back too much, Greg. And Lon, you're here.
I'm here.
Danielle,
Find me on
you're here.
Twitter at LONS. And I'd just like to say to everybody in the chat room, Spinal Tap is not a real band.
It's not a real band.
But those are actors.
you could make the case that it was based. I thought about saying Spinal Tap, making the case that
Those
it
are
was based on a real band, even though Spinal. But
That is
that's
Michael
too difficult.
McKean and
That's too
Harry
difficult.
Shearer.
Well, no,
They're not Christopher Guest. They're not real. That's not real.
They're not real. Also,
stuff.
yeah, sorry I didn't get to talk to you guys more about Topsy Turvy, because that is my favorite, because I am a theater nerd. But yeah, I'll just find me on Twitter at Danielle Radford. That's it. All my stuff is there.
I think people thought this would be the most serious heavy match.
This was
All right, we'll talk after the show's over. We'll see you next week.
Bye. We're having fun.
Fun.